Hello, Livingston, and welcome to Getting into College, our first college admissions program here on Livingston Education. I'm Mike Raymer, and I am excited to introduce our three panelists, all Livingston-based college consultants. Melanie Talesnick, founder of AdmitU Consulting. Nick Wierda, president of First Choice Prep. And Monica Verma, senior counselor at C2 Education. Welcome, Melanie, Nick, and Monica. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. We will be discussing a range of topics to help students maximize their applications when applying to college. For all watching, please participate by commenting and asking questions in the live stream, and we'll do our best to answer them in a Q&A at the end of the program. So let's begin with each panelist giving a brief background of themselves. Melanie, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie Talesnick. As Mike said, I own AdmitU Consulting. I've been an independent college counselor for the past 18 years, so it's been a while. And prior to starting my independent counseling business, I was a school counselor at Livingston High School, a counselor at Morristown High School, and ended my career as a counselor and college counselor at Morristown. I've had the business in Livingston now for the past, like I said, 18 years. We love working with kids and walking with them through hand in hand through the process. And a little bit more about my background. I am also a certified educational planner, which only about the top 2% of the counselors in the world have that distinction. So I feel terribly for your children when they take tests, because I had to take tests to become that, but here I am now, and I hope to be able to give you guys a great education and work with my fellow colleagues to be able to answer some of the burning questions that we know are super stressful during this time.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Nick, tell us about yourself.
Sure, yeah. My name is Nick Wierda. I am the founder of First Choice Prep, located in Livingston. I've been tutoring since 2005, so 16 years now. Founded First Choice Prep in 2010. It was myself. We've since grown into a team of 20, close-knit tutors and administrators. We've tutored thousands of students for, all manner of standardized tests and academic subjects. We've partnered with high schools in the area for test prep and diagnostic tests and, the like. I mean, we pride ourselves on helping anyone and everyone with any sort of, academic or standardized test endeavor that they need help with.
Thank you, Nick.
Probably about it.
Thank you. Monica, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica. I'm the senior counselor with C2 Livingston. I've been in this role for about 3 years with them. And I kind of fell into it by accident. Before this, I was an adjunct professor and I was teaching entrepreneurship. And I found that my students wanted to talk more about their lives and the jobs that they should take rather than business, which was kind of a interesting, realization for me. So I started working with C2 and I help students kind of create the story about what they are looking to present to colleges, find their passions. I'm jokingly called the life coach of the center. So I also do a little bit of therapy throw in there. But essentially my role is to help students and parents navigate this process as lessly as possible. That's not a word, I just made that up. So yeah, happy to be here and answer any questions and, give my 2 cents on anything that people want to know more about.
Thank you, Monica. It's so great to have all three of you here today. Again, Livingston-based college consultants, and we appreciate your information and sharing your knowledge. So let's start off. Applying to college is a process, right? 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. When is a good time for students to start thinking about college, and what should they be doing? Do you feel is in middle school, is that too early? Give us a sense. What are your thoughts, Melanie?
Okay, so do I think students should be thinking about college in middle school? I think kids should be kids. I think that we are definitely in a in a society right now that is very driven by college. So sure, do I like that students start thinking about it at that time? I do, but I also think that kids should be motivated for the right reasons. So, if you are loving your math class, I think you should take higher level math classes. If you like playing soccer, you should be playing soccer. I remember years ago, I had a student come into my office, and mom came in and she said, she must play lacrosse. And I said, what do you mean she must play lacrosse? And she said, well, I read in a book that a student has to be active within their sports organizations. And I said, does your daughter like playing lacrosse? And she said, she hates it and she's terrible. And I said, so then why would she do something that she doesn't like? So I think that you have to always be motivated for the right reasons. I think if your students are ready to start thinking about college as an end goal, you can have that conversation. But I think that it's sort of the skills and activities that you put into place when they're younger. So they're starting to try things. Try lacrosse. If you don't like it, try something else. But really, we want to see that you're interested in your education and active within your activities. And I think it has to be at the right time for the right kid. I could tell you myself, I don't know if I was ready in middle school to have that conversation, but by freshman, sophomore year, there are things that you should and can be doing to then be able to fuel it up as when you go through the application process. That's my opinion.
Monica, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with Melanie in most of what she said, in that the focus really should be on the passions. And so why that's important is because honestly, it does actually lead into the applications later. A lot of the essay topics and the way we describe the activities that they're doing. I think you can really tell when a student has just done something because everyone else was doing it, or when in the way that they talk about it, and that starts early. And it's a good idea to play around with things because colleges do like to see that you're committed to activities for a period of time. You haven't just done it for 3 months. And so, one thing I find is that around high school, students take a look at what they did since they were young, and they do kind of a vetting of, am I still interested in this? Do I still love it? And I encourage that. I think that's actually the right time to kind of check in about everything they've done and maybe try something new and then continue with stuff that they like. And that, I would say that is the crux of what the student themselves should be focused on in those early years versus like, what will colleges look like? Because it's really hard to fake passion. So that takes time. And so you want to make sure that you're picking stuff and you're doing it for a long time so that it's pretty clear that you love doing it.
Very good. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you're in middle school, right? I mean, your grades, they're not going to show up on your application, right? They're not part of your transcript that you submit to colleges when you apply. But I do think it's important when you're in middle school to, be developing good study habits, to be a good student, that you want to sort of like, you want to know what it takes to get A's in your classes in middle school so that when you do get to high school and the grades do, finally count for college admissions, you don't have to, it's not such a tough learning curve for you. So yeah, I think that in 7th grade and 8th grade, for parents out there, if you're 7th grader or 8th grader, it seems to struggle with, not have the best study skills, not be the most organized student, maybe try to work on shoring those things up for when they get to high school. That's kind of it, I would say. I mean, you want to also work on being a good reader. I always tell, my parents and my students that reading is one of the most important skills that you can have just in life. And, it's going to be very helpful for you when you're in high school, and it's going to be very helpful on these standardized tests and everything. But, really just be as good a student as you can be. Start developing those good habits in middle school if you haven't already.
Well said. Thank you. So let's ask the next question. What are the main components of a college application? Talk to us about that. Monica, start us off with that, the main components.
Sure. So there's a few different areas. Obviously, the most important is academic. So there's within the academic section goes the GPA, which is based on, the classwork and the grades that you're getting. And then there's the test scores fall within the academic section. And then also if you've taken other courses, so a lot of students tend to take either online courses or other college courses. And so although they don't get a grade for that, it doesn't go on their transcript. We talk about that in the application. So when I talk to students and they mention that I did this other, higher level course, we talk about that because it's kind of an extension of what they've been doing in school. So that's kind of the academic area. And then there's obviously the extracurriculars. And within that, there's school activities, the formal clubs, and anything you're doing, which is you're affiliated with the school. And then there's beyond school, like the community service, or other sports or other things you might be doing beyond that. And so I call those the formal extracurriculars because they're affiliated with an organization or you're doing them as part of a larger group. And then there's beyond those extracurriculars, which typically they fall into either like passion projects or hobbies, and colleges like to see that stuff as well. In fact, if you look on the Common App, which is the actual application, they say in there that put in hobbies, stuff that you're doing that you may not necessarily get credit for. And so that can be anything that the student is interested in. And that's where I think we go next level into passion and showing that I really am thinking about doing this. And so I work with students on many different types of projects. They design them themselves, they're self-motivated. And I think it's interesting for colleges to see what students are picking to do in their time when they don't really have to. They don't have to do it. It's something that they're excited about and they have to self-motivate. So some projects that I worked on with students are coding projects, setting up an NGO to work on a social cause, business plan development, online little businesses. These are fun things that aren't, really like a work per se. It's more that the students are doing them just because they enjoy them and they should get credit for it. And then there's hobbies as well, like I mentioned, and that's stuff that I find even they don't realize whatever they're doing in their free time is interesting to colleges. And so even that, I encourage them to really like stick with those hobbies. I can go on and on if anyone else wants to jump in with any more comments.
To ask Melanie to review those components of the application. There's as Monica was saying, there's the grades and transcript, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's, test scores, college entrance exams. We'll talk about that a little more. Those are the main, right? And then there's extracurriculars. What others, as from the eyes of an admissions counselor in a college, what are they looking at? These,
Sure.
main parts, Melanie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at your transcript, the college always says, are you taking the most academically rigorous schedule you can handle? So that's when people start asking about honors classes, AP classes, am I doing research? And many people often then ask us like, well, what's it better to do? Is it better if I get an A in a CP level class or a B in an AP or honors class? And there's usually a witty admissions counselor that says, well, you should get an A in the AP and honors class. But, it's really an individual decision. And you really want to look at those course rigor to say, like going back to Nick's point, if you don't like to read, taking honors in an AP class of history and English is going to be a challenge. But if you're more of a math and science person, you can still get into one of those highly regarded schools and not have AP and honors across the board. So I think your academic rigor is something really important. I think standardized testing is another huge component. And Nick, I'm going to skip over it for a minute and then send it back to you that way. I think Monica's correct when it comes to your extracurricular activities. Very different is colleges want to know, like, it's more about the quality of your involvement, not the quantity of your involvement. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to be in 19 different clubs, but if I'm doing 4 different things that's keeping me super busy, that's how I'm demonstrating what my passion is. And then, so in addition to my activities then and my schoolwork and the standardized testing, there's also teacher letters of recommendation. So not only does your counselor write a letter of recommendation highlighting who you are as a whole person, the colleges also ask about teacher letters of recommendation. So they want to know, what's this student going to be like when they come to my university? Are they going to be an active participant? Are they a good individual worker? Do they think that they'll be very collaborative with other people? So your teacher letters of recommendation are really important. Your activities are really important. If your name is on the library, doesn't hurt either for, and it's not a coincidence that is the Talesnick Library and you're applying there. Not a bad thing. That doesn't hurt in the admissions process either. And then lastly, there's a piece that's called demonstrated interest. So colleges they're needy. They want to know, do you like us? And, now that we've become a whole virtual age, thanks to COVID, colleges have done a lot to try and bring college to your living room. So there's the ability to be able to take a virtual visit on their website, sign up for their mailing list. You can also participate in a student panel. So there's so many different things that you can do to also kind of hit on all of the different components that are an important piece of it. But another really important piece that's kind of been a pendulum swing, thank you also to COVID, has been standardized testing. And I'm going to let Nick go crazy on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, so, standardized tests are a part of the admissions process. Again, when you're reporting, when you're sending your application into schools, many schools will require that you send them either an SAT score or an ACT score. Many schools now, especially due to COVID, are making that requirement optional. But you're still able to send scores from SATs or ACTs. Generally our advice to students is just focus on getting a good score on one of those two tests. So no schools are going to require that you send them both scores from an SAT and from an ACT. They just want to see a score from one of the two tests. Some colleges will, they have this policy that's called super scoring, which is that essentially you send them all of your test scores, and then they cherry pick your best scores from individual sections across the test that you've taken. So you send them all of your SAT scores, and they cherry pick your best math score and your best verbal score from two different tests. So that's a school by school policy, but generally, again, when you're submitting your transcript, you're submitting your GPA, and you're submitting your test score from one of the two, not from both of them generally.
So let's talk a little more about standardized tests, if we could, Nick. You mentioned ACT and SAT. In my day, it was just SAT.
Yeah.
And of course now ACT, SAT. Which should students be taking? Is there a diagnostic test? And in addition to that, give us a sense on the timing of when is the best time to be thinking about prepping and taking these tests?
Sure. Yeah. So, you're absolutely right. Back when I was, taking these tests, back when I'm sure Monica and Melanie were taking these tests, the SAT was king. There were biases as well, like regional biases, where if you were applying to a school on one of the coasts, you were generally, sending SAT scores. If you were applying to schools in the Midwest or the South, they, in many cases, either preferred or had, more of an appetite for ACT scores. Those biases have completely melted away. So every college that accepts test scores accepts either one and equally weights them. Okay. So there's no inherent benefit to, submitting an SAT score to Harvard nowadays over an ACT score, right? A great ACT score speaks just as loudly to them as a great SAT score does. So, to your point, you mentioned that, students might want to take a diagnostic. We absolutely strongly recommend that everyone, before they begin any sort of test prep, determine which of these two tests you're naturally better at, right? And there's a laundry list of differences between the two. They're stylistically, very different tests. And most students have a, inclination towards one or the other. So you want to start with that. And then, you try to also figure out what your general weaknesses are within that test and try to, pinpoint what you've got to do to get better, to improve your score on that particular test that you're good at, or that you're better at of the two. Now, when should students begin prepping for these tests? I always say, and this is like such a cop out, but I always say you want to start prepping for these tests when you're ready to start prepping for these tests. But generally, we are recommending that students wait until at the very, very, very earliest, the spring of their sophomore year. We don't want you to start too early on this process. I am a strong believer in the idea that there is such a thing as burnout when it comes to, prepping for standardized tests. So I'd say at the very earliest, sophomore year, spring, but that's like if you're in an accelerated math class and you're math ready to start by then. Most students are not. Most students are, I think, going to be more ready to begin their test prep in the fall, or even like in the winter, and prep for the tests in the spring. But generally you're setting aside a few months of time to prepare for and master the test that you're better at. So the other thing that really comes into play here is your schedule, right? When is it going to be, when are you going to be able to like spend the time and the effort doing this stuff, right? We always tell our students, like, you want to try to treat your test prep like another class in school that you're trying to get an A in, right? So you have an extra class on your plate now. When is it going to be most like easiest for you to tackle that, right? If you're, varsity soccer player, captain of the soccer team, it's going to be tough for you to do that in the fall, right? Maybe hold off until after the season's over and start in November or so. But there's a lot of different factors. In my opinion, you definitely don't start before spring of sophomore year.
Okay. Talk to us about COVID times, right? We're learning a lot of colleges are waiving standardized tests. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right? Should a student still take them? And they're taking these tests online now, of course, right? So talk to us a little bit. They're not.
They're not. No. So
They
a couple of
to, but
they wanted to, but
not
yeah,
happening yet.
So in terms of like test optional is what you're referring to. So the colleges that a vast majority of colleges went test optional due to COVID, right? Because kids just weren't able to sit for tests. Test optional, though, means that you have the option to submit your scores, right? It doesn't mean that they don't want you to send them, right? There's a distinction here that I need to make between test optional on one hand and test blind on the other hand. Test blind means that the college will not look at your test scores, okay? There are a number of schools that are test blind. I think it's about like 69 or so now that are completely test blind. You do not send them your test scores because they won't look at them. The vast majority of other colleges are test optional, which means that, again, you are able to send them your test scores if you have them and if you want to. For I would say a vast majority of those. Now, of course, they aren't necessarily going to say this to you, but most of the schools that are now test optional, again, were forced into it because of the pandemic, right? They had no plans to do this. They had to do this. And I would say most of those schools would still prefer that you send them your scores if you have them. Of course, they will look at your application and they could, very well accept you without the test scores. Test scores have never been the number one factor in college admissions.
So I'm thinking, Nick, that, this is a deep topic on tests.
Sure.
Any of those have questions in the live stream, ask you, and we can direct further questions on standardized tests.
Sure. Sorry.
I appreciate all the really good insights. So let's switch gears to another topic. Let's talk about the college list. Meaning, when you're creating a list of colleges that the student is applying to, right? And each student is different and unique, right? How do you create that list, and what parameters should students and parents be looking at? Melanie, you want to take away that?
Sure. So for us, we really look at fit. And I think it's really important to consider that when you're making a college list. Colleges there are over, I think there's close to 3,000 colleges in our country. And I know many of us get fixated on the ones that we see in the rankings and everything that, only the name brands. And I think it's number one, really important to understand that the majority of colleges, their goal is to accept students. They're called offices of admissions, not offices of denials. So we need to realize that out of those close to 3,000 schools, over 70% of those, more than 70% of those have a more than 70% acceptance rate. So it's really important to understand that colleges want to accept kids. So when you go to make your college list, you want to think about fit. And fit comes down to everything from academics, geography, economics, size, social. All of these different factors are part of when you're starting to make your list. And just because, I know there's lots of parents that are on here now, just because your college was great for you doesn't mean that it's great for your kid. So you want to think that fit comes down to, when you think academics, it's a learning environment, it's a location, it's the relationships that you might have with professors, it's the deep dive into how research-based something is. So, you have to really start to understand and know who you are as a student to know what's going to make my fit. I think one of the other aspects that people will often ask is, how many colleges should I have on my list? And I think that we really want to think about that. That very much depends on the student. What we've also found is that students are applying to more colleges than ever, which makes this process even more unpredictable than ever. So I think it's really understanding that it has to be a balance, and you want to go to a college where you're going to thrive, not where you're going to work hard just to survive. So you really want to make sure that it becomes a part of who you are.
So the size of a school would be a very important parameter, right? A large state university, rah-rah school potentially, right? Big football team for sports programs, or smaller private schools, right? So the size of that's important. And you mentioned also, Melanie, geography, right? In terms of where it's located. We're here in the Northeast, so is it within driving distance? Monica, talk to us more about, the parameters that as students create their list. What's your experience with how many colleges students apply to? And then talk to us a little bit about reach schools, that piece.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we recommend about 10 to 12 schools on the list on average. Most students, when they first come to me, they have about 25 to 30 schools on their list. And, we do a lot of work around how to get it from that big list, which oftentimes is just based on rankings or maybe majors as well, but, not really a great sense of how are schools different. And so we start with academics. And the reason is because, let's be honest, that's the major reason that you're going to school for 4 years. So it's really important to understand, you don't have to know exactly what your major is. Some students do, many don't, but you want to have a sense of the universe of majors or your top 3 majors that you're considering, and picking schools that are based on the programs and really understanding how the programs are different. A biology program at one school will be very different from a biology program at another school. And so that's a big part of it. And location is a really big part of it as well. I think mostly because of internship opportunities as well. So where the school is, and what the ecosystem is around the school will really influence the type of opportunities that you have. I personally went to grad school in DC, although I'm from Jersey, and there was a huge difference in the types of internships, the networking I was doing, the Rolodex that I was building from being in DC than there was if I had been in Jersey. So that's a big part of it as well. And then, another thing that students don't actually think about, and it kind of pops up later, is the flexibility in the curriculum. So some schools do open curriculum, which means, and that type of program is better for students that maybe aren't completely set on a major or an area, because they have more flexibility. So it's not as strict in terms of the types of classes they need to take. Some schools offer co-op programs where you actually can work with a company and get college credit. So there's a lot of schools do have things in place for students that are not settled on majors. And so it's important for the student to know how committed they are to what they're thinking about, and do they need to be in an environment which is more conducive to exploration, or do they need to be in a more structured environment where they really just already have decided they're on a path. So those are some of the major things. And then of course there's competitiveness. How hard is it to get into these schools? So we recommend about 4 to 5 reach schools, 4 to 5 match schools, and reach means that you're, according to your GPA and your test scores, harder to get in, but you're still going to try. Match schools, 4 to 5, are schools that 50-50 chance, good chance that you're going to get in, and a couple of safeties where you know you're going to get into this school. So you really, and that's also for mental sanity purposes, not just, to have a diverse, a lot of options. Also, so you don't get too fixated. One thing I see a lot with students is they get really excited about one school and that's all they think about. So it's good to have a lot of different options so they're not just obsessing about one school. And the last thing, and then I'll give it back to you, Mike, is the campus vibe. So this is one thing when you ask, what can we do freshman year, starting early on, you can start visiting schools. I even have students that have visited freshman year, and that gives them a good reference point. So as they go throughout high school, they remember, okay, so this is what I liked about the campus, this is what I liked about that university. And so that can start early on, and that's a really important decision. I've worked with a lot of students that have an amazing list, everything looks good on a spreadsheet, and they show up on campus and they know within an hour whether they want to be there or not. So that's a big part of the building the college list, which often gets overlooked.
Very good. And on that topic, and Melanie mentioned it as well, the demonstrated interest, that's goes a long way these days as compared to when we were kids. Yeah. I mean, Monica, you mentioned to visit the colleges. What are some other ways that students can show demonstrated interest? Nick or Melanie, you want to jump in? What relationship with the admissions rep? Talk to us a bit about that. And is it important?
I think the answer to that is it depends, so does a place like Penn State care that you like them? Not really. They get 100,000 applications a year. They don't really care. But yet you would think a school like WashU, which is in St. Louis, that says, ooh, I should go visit them. WashU just put out a statement this year that says, we don't care about demonstrated interest. So I think your motives shouldn't be about what does college want. And I think that's also important when you're also writing an essay, that you don't want to think about, well, what does the college want to know about me? What do I want to tell the college? The same thing, just like Monica's saying, you're visiting, don't visit because the college wants you to visit because you want to visit, because you want to try and figure out what the vibe of that school is. I mean, everybody's here in Livingston, and we keep on forgetting the fact that where we live, we are surrounded by within a hour driving distance of about probably 50 colleges that you can go and visit. You can go for the day and go with the family and go walk around Drew and walk around Fairleigh Dickinson, and you can see what some kind of small liberal arts school might feel like. And then you could take a 45-minute drive and go to Rutgers and go see what a big rah-rah type of school is going to be like. You can go into Manhattan and say, whoa, this is a city school. Is this something that I really want to experience? So I think that there's a lot to think about where, yes, demonstrated interest is great, but I really didn't think that it depends. The high schools are also doing a lot to try and bring the colleges to you as well. Livingston High School, if your child is on Naviance, they have a list of the colleges that are visiting the high school. Some have been in person, some have been virtually. You can register for those. There's going to hopefully be a local college fair that'll come in this. Maybe there'll be one in the fall. I don't know if it's happening yet, but there's definitely hopefully one in the spring. That's another way to demonstrate interest, but you can get your name on mailing lists now. And parents, I know that you're eager to do it. let your kids put their email address down. Colleges don't want to hear from you. They would like your money, but they don't want to hear from you.
Great points, Melanie.
Yeah. Can I add one thing on the demonstrated interest piece, just real quick? Why also that's important, and this is something that I think, Melanie, you and I can have a discussion about over coffee one day. Colleges, built into the admission decision is some factors that we don't have control over, right? So we have a lot of control over a lot of it, but there's some things that we just can't change. And so demonstrated interest is one of those things. So oftentimes I see a regional bias. There's certain schools in certain parts of the country that just won't admit as many students from a certain region because they think that the student is not going to take the spot. So if you're showing the school, I've talked to people that know about the school, I know a lot about it, they feel more comfortable saying, okay, if we give the student a spot, they will likely take it because they have spent all this time digging into our programs and they understand it. So it's also to kind of, in those unquantifiable factors of admissions that we don't know how that plays in, it kind of helps with that in terms of showing that, okay, if you give me a spot, I'm definitely going to take it. Please give it to me. Just simply.
Good points. So let's talk more about the components of the application. We talked about, of course, the academics and the transcript and the test scores, but there are other subtopics, subcomponents, which are important, right? The essays and teacher recommendations. Well, let me throw out a softball question for all of you. Do you recommend students get help with these?
Of
With
course,
the
you
of
have our
course.
contact information later. But I don't want you to get too much help with it because sometimes too many cooks in the kitchen make it sound like you're, and I'm apologizing now to the 45-year-old lawyers that are on this call, but every college admissions counselor always says, hey, your 45-year-old father, I can tell when they edited your essay, because lawyers do something to essays that just is not what a narrative personal statement piece is supposed to be like. So I think it's really important that, yes, get some help with it, but make sure it's somebody that understands how to work with teenagers, how to talk like teenagers, and, your high school English teacher, one of us, a tutor, a family friend. Your parents are great because your parents have known you for 17 years and they know a lot of your story. But when it comes to 650 words, you really want to make sure that you're making it a personal narrative of what you think that a college, what you want to tell a college, not what you think they want to know. And you really want to reveal a piece of you that maybe doesn't come out anywhere else in your application. So, writing the essay, I know, is something that everybody freaks out about and is going to be stressed out, but it's 650 words to share a piece of you that, whether it's these characteristics, my values, my aha moment, every essay is kind of about the same thing. It is not something you have to start writing your freshman year, because I guarantee you're going to have other things that are going to happen to you and things that you want to talk about much later. So I always like to explain this whole college process is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're all going to be hitting different pieces at all different times. And you really, if you started in middle school, or if your friend starts thinking about it sophomore year of high school, that's okay, because we all hit different spots at different times. We all start, we all finish, and we all should breathe and probably take some water along the way, and realize that you will get into college and you just have to go through the motions that way.
Let's talk about the mechanics a bit for those that may not be as familiar. So we use the terminology common application, right? And the College Board. Simply explain that if you could. Nick, you're familiar, right, with the Common App? What Melanie was getting to is there's a general essay, right? And then there's college specific essays. Yeah. So the Common App, who can talk a little, how many?
I can.
One application, and a student can use that to apply to
900
schools.
schools.
Take it away, Nick.
Yeah.
Monica, what's your?
Sure. I can just really quickly. So there's a personal statement, which is called the Common App essay for short. And that's what Melanie was saying, giving them something new about yourself that they cannot figure out from looking at the rest of your application. So you don't, if so, you don't want to pick activities. You don't want to pick something that's obvious. You want to give them something really revealing. And I would say in terms of when should the student get input on that, I think one important point is when they're picking the topic. I see a lot of students that they didn't check with anyone on the topic. And so sometimes they end up picking topics which easily could have been avoided, or they could have gone deeper. So the brainstorming process is really key. And for that, you can have inputs. You can ask other people, you can ask family. So you kind of have, you know, a lot of input at that stage before you go too far down that road. And then there's supplemental essays. The supplemental essays fall into a couple of different categories. It's typically, what do you want to major in? So, and you know, you have to show kind of over years of experiences, curriculum, activities, personal connection. You've picked areas that you've been studying. And then there's, why do you want to come to this school? That's where some of the demonstrated interest bit comes in. What do I like about the school? We visited, we've talked to people. And then there will also be, there's like a third category of creative essays. Not all schools will have that. The more competitive they become, they will have, like UChicago has some really interesting creative essays. I think one was, how can Olive Garden offer unlimited all you can eat? Reflect on that, right? So it'll be like something more like, just to see, there's no wrong answer to that essay. It's more just to get a sense of how students think. So those are like the three kind of areas of essays, which are really important. And so I think with the personal statement, typically with students, I have them brainstorm 3 different areas. And so Melanie is very right when she says that the idea has to come from the student, because if they pick, you can ask other people for the topic, but if someone else picks a topic for the student, they don't have much to say about it, then it doesn't really go too far. So I think there's a period of like actually vetting and, you know, making sure that you have stories to tell, because storytelling is a big part of the personal statement.
So again, Monica, there's the common application for those that aren't as familiar. There's one general essay, right? And isn't there 5 prompts or something? There's a number of prompts for, and that general essay could be used in a common application to apply to many, many schools, right? And and then you were saying the supplementals, there's what, 2 or 3 for school specific, like why do you want to come here? These types of questions, right? What do you want to do, right? Yeah.
So the personal statement, most schools want that. In fact, all schools want that. That is the big creative, about my personality, something that I went through growing up, my development, you know, something original and unique to that student. And then there's the more kind of just give us information about what you want to major in, what do you like about the school. Those are more straightforward, but still a little bit of storytelling. They're just different in tone. Those are important because that's where colleges start to see, why are you coming to the school? What is it what are you thinking of studying? What do you like about the school? How much time have you spent learning about the school? So a lot of that information comes out in those essays, and they are important. Not all schools have those though. Only the most competitive schools will have more and more of those, you'll see.
Okay. Let's talk about teacher recommendations too. I would think more and more these become a greater weight. Nick, talk to us a little bit about that, since your focus is test prep, right? So if someone is a strong English student or a strong math, integrate that answer if you could in terms of which teachers should students ask for recommendations?
I mean, I think I don't really know much about this, so I'm going to defer to Monica and Melanie, but you know, I would imagine that you're going to be asking the teachers that you actually have a relationship with in school, you know, the teachers that know you best, who can write more than just a form letter for you. But yeah, I mean, Monica, Melanie, this is your area of expertise.
Yeah, and Nick's right. And Nick's also right in the fact of, just because I'm strong in English or just because I'm strong in science, that I should ask my science or English teacher. But really, you want the person that can speak to you, to your work ethic, to how you contribute to the classroom, to how I help others. Am I collaborative? Am I able to think on a next level? So a lot of the misconceptions come from, if I'm applying, if I'm more of a science and math person, should I only ask science and math teachers? It doesn't matter. We really want to make sure like who you are. I will say that there are probably a couple schools that if you are a science or engineering person, they actually require a science or math teacher, but it is very rare that that happens.
Like
But
a
most
Caltech or
likely
something.
that's correct. Like, but most likely you're going to gravitate towards that class and that teacher anyway. Ideally, when it comes to recommendation letters, our recommendation is that we want you to get it from somebody at least from sophomore year and higher, ideally from junior year. And especially with the students that are currently in school, you know, you guys haven't really had real, you know, you haven't had a lot of real interactions with your teachers yet. So the people that now you've been able to see on a daily basis, more likely we're going to encourage you to look for teachers from junior year and potentially sophomore year. But freshman year, you're going to be a much different kid than you were freshman year than you are when you're applying to college. So, you know, that's where you want to kind of plant the seed and think about like, well, who's going to know me best, both as a student and as a person.
Very good
Now,
point.
is there, real quick, let me just jump in. Is there also something to be said for asking teachers who might not be inundated with other recommendation letters as well?
I think it's, you know, moreover thinking about the teacher who maybe I don't have an easy A in this class and I have worked really hard and seen them for extra help and gone in at lunchtime 5 days a week. And just because I don't have an A in that class, but I really can show you a lot of other things about me. So I think it's really like the relationships that you eventually build. And if you are more of the not that kid who raises your hand every 5 seconds in class or goes to see the teacher, another thing that Livingston High School does is they have brag sheets that they call that students will complete for their teachers so that you can gently remind your teacher of what your favorite topic was in class or the time that you really contributed and what your strengths might be. So there's lots of different ways and lots of different tools that Livingston has in general to be able to help the counselor and the teacher really kind of get to know you in your best way possible.
And that's great, Melanie. I was going to mention a question about brag sheets, but you covered that.
Mhm.
And again, if people, all those watching, if you have specific questions about that, put that in the live stream, please. Let's talk about non-school activities and what students not should be doing during the summer, but what are some suggestions, recommendations, say extracurricular activities outside school and also during the summers? What are some suggestions that you might have? Monica, take it away.
Sure. So definitely, as I already mentioned, I'm a big fan of passion projects. For the reasons that I stated earlier, it really does, they're typically, it's fun stuff that they're doing anyway. So you might as well pick something that you're interested in doing because you can go really far with it if you have a passion for it. And so, like I mentioned, it depends on really what your interest is. There's no one right project for any student. Everyone picks something a little bit different. And so you have to, it's a good idea to kind of just think about, am I socially oriented? Do I want to do something for the community? Do I want to, try my hand at entrepreneurship and set up like some small business? Do I want to make an app or a programming thing that I can dabble with? Because all that, even the dabbling with it, and it's not necessarily that you're actually putting something out in the world all the time. The process of going through that's stuff that college students do. So in college, they start to kind of play around with that. So showing that you're kind of thinking about that before, and in terms of what to do, it really depends on your interests. And so that's important. I think for the summers, I see it depends on what students are interested in, but I do see a lot of summer programs. So let's say like STEM students are really taking a summer program at a college in Jersey, like NJIT, Rutgers. A lot of these schools have really great programs, and they're not necessarily great for learning. Yes, you will learn more. It is more college level content, but it's also the connections that they make. So a lot of students will meet professors or other people working at the university, and some will channel that into a research project. But they get it started, they learn about certain areas over the summer, and then they have a mentor. So doing something over the summer where you can kind of connect with people that are already in a place where you want to be is really useful. But honestly, there's no one thing that they can do. I've had students one student wrote a poetry book, And it also doesn't necessarily need to relate to your major, because the student that wrote a poetry book was going pre-med, right? So even in that, you have an opportunity to show some more creativity. So you could do something where, although I'm studying this, this is like my actual other passion. So, you know, for that, it's really just sitting down and reflecting and having the courage to just say, you know what, I love to do this. I don't see it available in my space. I don't see anyone else doing this. I'm just going to get it started on my own. But really important to have a mentor. So because, you know, all these, you're all like, the students are so busy that it's hard for them to, I find that, you know, they're motivated because they love it, but to have someone that they can talk to about it is really useful. So I think, like, you know, always trying to find mentors and teachers and activities that they're doing is really important.
You know, we started the program, we talked about it's a process, right? 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. And we're speaking about the different timing of when things are due, when to take the tests, the entrance exams, when to ask for teacher recommendations. But let's talk about, for the viewers, that so they get a good sense, there's different ways to apply, right? There's acronyms: EA, ED, regular decision. If you could explain what they are and what's the timing of these, when the applications are due. Melanie?
Sure. So, yes, there are multiple different, you know, we talked about applying, you know, via the common application or the university's application, but there are different deadlines and different ways that you can actually apply to college. So there is something called rolling admissions. So rolling admissions for a university says, as soon as we get everything we need to know about the applicant, their transcript, their test scores, their application, their letters of recommendation, they don't wait for a certain deadline. They get that student's information, they close the file, and they give back decisions, or they roll them back. And basically what they're doing is they start admitting students now to all of these different seats. And as they do that, they start to fill up the seats. So it's easier to get in when you apply now than when you apply here, when there's only limited amount of seats left, and maybe they're looking for a tuba player and you're just not a tuba player. So that's rolling admission. Then there's something called, then we'll go to the complete opposite side of that, which we'll call regular decision. Regular decision says it doesn't matter whether you submit your application August 1st, the day it opens, or December 31st at 11:59 p.m. when the application closes on January 1st. All students turn their applications in, and then we begin to read applications all at the same time. So starting, you know, after January 1st, and all students will end up getting a decision back, usually in mid to late March. Then there's something called early action. So early action is a type of decision where you basically say to a college, I'm going to get my material to you. Most of the time it's by November 1st. There are a couple schools in the South where their deadline is October 15th, but basically you get your materials to them. You're basically telling the college, I really, really like you, but I'm not ready to commit to you. So I've gotten you all of my materials, my application, essay, recommendation letters, transcript, everything that makes my file. You get that to them by November 1st. They make a commitment to get a decision back to you before, I'd say, February 1st. Then, so it's non-committal. Then there's something called early decision. Early decision, you saying to the college, if I am accepted, I will come. And also the other part is my parents will pay. So you're making that kind of commitment, and your application is also due November 1st. You can still apply to other colleges, but if you are admitted, usually by December 20th, depending on when Christmas falls, but usually by December 20th, if you're admitted, you withdraw your applications and you are admitted and accepted to go to the college of your choice. That is it's a binding decision, and it's something that everybody has to take pretty seriously. So, but when you're looking at a timeline, your usually first deadline, I'm going to say October 15th, but that's really for only a couple select schools in the South, but usually November 1st, November 15th, December 1st, January 1st. And that's kind of where you're working of your student's senior year.
And back on the topic that we mentioned earlier with Nick, with test prep and test scores. So the latest that a student may that you would recommend them taking a standardized test would be what?
Yeah, I mean, like you want to have your scores by October of your senior year.
Okay.
So that's like if you're doing SAT, there is an October SAT. That's the last one you can take before those early admissions deadlines. And then for ACT, it's September.
Fantastic. So
And just to add one point to the early decision, there's a couple of things that really are important. You have to, so I actually give the students criteria. Are these things done? Otherwise you cannot apply early decision because it's one school, right? You can only apply to one school early decision. And so one of the things is, are you comfortable with your test scores? There's no other test scores that you need to do. Do you need the fall transcript, the grades from fall semester? And it's not so much about GPA. It could also be about maybe you're taking classes where you want to show that you're doing really well. So if your GPA is kind of lacking and you want to give it a bump up, then you may want to wait that fall semester and not do early decision and do regular decision. And the third thing is, again, I go back to the point, have you seen the school? If you have not seen the school, and you would think that students that make that decision know everything about the school. So making a decision to commit to a school for 4 years that you have not set foot on campus is not a good idea. So you do have to look at, there's a couple of these 3 things I think are really important before you can finally say, yes, I am ready to commit to an early decision to this school.
Very good. This, of course, program is focused on college admissions, but such an important piece to the pie, especially from our parents' perspective. And we don't have the time to discuss it, but I wanted to get your thoughts briefly on the financial piece for parents to sit down with their students, their children. And do you feel it's important to have that that conversation on the finances? Melanie, you're shaking your head. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the first time in your child's life that you're going to talk to them in, I wish that I could say tens of thousands of dollars, but it's, this could be $250,000 that you're about to talk about investing over the next 4 years. And I think it's important to talk to your kids about that, to understand this is what college costs, and, this is what we can contribute. This is what we may expect you to contribute. If you're thinking about going to graduate school, I still remember the day I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I want to go to graduate school. And he said, good luck with that, Melanie. And I said, so you're not paying for this one? So, it's a big reality check too for, Monica had mentioned something before, like students who are interested in medical school, like you got a really expensive, next couple of years coming at you. So, you may want to consider going to a state school for undergrad so that you have money set aside for graduate school. So I think it's just in general talking to your kids about what this costs and what our investment is about to be in your future, and maybe what we expect for our ROI, like what is our return on investment for this too. So I think
your thoughts on that. Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah.
Nick, your thoughts on that also from the financial piece.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like, it's a major investment. I mean, I'll echo everything Melanie just said, but I think one of the things you can also do is research, merit aid. Lots of colleges offer merit aid. You can, find out what you have to do to apply for those pretty easily. There's also like independent scholarships that you can get that are not tied to individual colleges. Community organizations. I mean, I don't know specifics about Livingston community organizations that do this. Maybe Monica or Melanie, you have some ideas there, but that's definitely something that I think everyone should be looking into when they're applying to college.
And again, for the folks watching, this is a whole separate piece. There are financial experts that focus on the college costs, but I appreciate you all giving us your views. Monica, you have some thoughts, suggestions? It's important to have that conversation.
I mean, I wouldn't want to get involved in like what the conversation parents have with kids, but I will tell my personal story. For undergrad, for me, it came down to Rutgers and NYU. For everyone, if you're not aware, Rutgers is very affordable. I grew up in Jersey, and NYU is the opposite spectrum. So I went to Rutgers, And when I went to grad school, I went to Georgetown. So, and to Melanie's point, my parents paid for my undergrad, I paid for my grad school. And frankly, I think that it happened at the time. I didn't understand why I wasn't going to the city to live there for 4 years and get my life started. But in retrospect, it was the best decision I ever made, because it's really in undergrad. Yes, you may, as much as we talk about majors and you know what you want to do, you're still exploring. So if you're not fully committed and to put that much money, that's a family decision. But I think just like my personal experiences, just like be careful about how much you're investing at what point in your life, because there is always grad school. And also that's by grad school, you may be a little bit more firm in your decision about what you want to do. So I just wanted to share my personal story, but I don't, have any recommendations about like.
And to that point, Monica, more and more are considering community colleges because of the cost piece, right? Melanie, you're shaking your head.
Mhm.
And there's many different options as each family looks at what they can afford and the options. Many, correct me if I'm wrong, I read a lot of articles on this, that some are choosing to go to a community college first off for the first couple of years, and then maybe transferring to a state college or a private, the cost considerations, as well as what Nick mentioned, the merit money, big conversation on that, which we don't not necessarily get into, but there are college experts that can help with the financing. Hey, I really appreciate the time. We're up on about an hour here, and we've covered almost everything. Some great questions are being asked in the live stream. Before I ask the questions in the live stream from people watching, I have one more question for all of you. How do you make a college application stand out? So admissions reps many times are getting thousands and thousands, right? Melanie, you mentioned earlier, some of the biggest state schools are getting 100,000 applications. So what's your 30-second on how do you have a standout application?
I think you should be yourself. I think the better you do in school, the more doors that are going to open to you. I think your standardized test scores have the potential of telling your story, but at the end of the day, be yourself, be passionate, follow what your interests are. And also, it's really kind of a hard pill to swallow, but also be realistic through the process as well.
Great advice. Be realistic. Monica, what do you think?
I would agree. I think you should lean into your uniqueness. So if there's something that you think is, makes you quirky, or you don't think people want to hear about it, they actually completely want to hear about it, and colleges want to hear about it. So if there's like, just an example, if you're into cartography, you like to make maps, and no one else does that, please do that, because it's going to make you stand out so much. I just wrote a great essay with a student on her fish keeping hobby. What a great story. I didn't know anything about fish keeping. I've never even heard of it. I didn't even know it was a thing. And I know that when someone reads that essay, I was floored by it. They're going to stop and pause. So the essays are a real opportunity to show your uniqueness, but also it's in other ways. So lean into it. Don't be afraid to be different than like everyone else and what they're doing.
Monica, what was that topic? Fish keeping?
Fish keeping, like setting up a entire like fish tank, and apparently there's an entire process behind this. It requires patience, life lessons. Like, it was this incredible essay about what it taught the student about patience and how we interact with nature, but never heard of it from anyone else. And the second that I heard about it, I said, that's what you're writing about, because it's super unique.
A unique essay. It tells you about a student's interests and passions. And you all touch on that. Here's a number of questions coming in the live stream. Some very good questions. Thank you all for asking them. If you have more, please put them in. Let's start off with this. Here's a test prep question. You ready, Nick?
Sure.
And we didn't talk about, there's so much to talk about through. We're just scratching the surface, aren't we all? But one of the parents has asked about the PSAT. How does the PSAT fit into the college process?
Minimally. So the PSAT won't count for anyone unless you score in like the 99th percentile of students who take it in junior year. So it doesn't count anyway until junior year, and only for like the top 1% in the state. So if you're in that category, then yeah, you want to try to do as well as you possibly can on the PSAT. because you could qualify for National Merit Scholarship. If you're not in that category, if you're most of us, then don't worry about the PSAT. It's really just like, you can use it as a practice test kind of a thing, because it's very similar to the SAT in style, but certainly not something to fret over, unless you're in that upper, top tier test taker.
Another question that's come in. We hadn't necessarily talked about this, but we touched on it. And it's really, I think, a good way to think about it. Resumes, right? What is a typical process of filtering a resume in the electronic format? We're seeing this more and more when people apply to jobs, but let's ask it this way. Are students, many schools looking for a resume? Or is that a good way to structure what students have achieved? Melanie, what are your thoughts on that resume?
Sure. So we refer to a prospective college student's resume as an activity sheet. We really want to make sure that what are you highlighting? What are you doing? Our college is expecting it. It's never mandatory, but there's definitely a spot to upload a resume or an activity sheet when you're putting it together. The other aspect of it is the common application, or most of the applications. There's another application called the coalition application. They limit the amount of space that you have to elaborate on your activities. So if you have more to say, you could certainly do it in an activity sheet format. The other thing that we've seen most recently on a lot of applications are, do you have a web presence? Our kids are a lot different than we were. And, many of our students have YouTube channels, Instagram accounts, blogs, businesses like Monica was talking about. So the ability to be able to say like, yeah, here's my web presence. We even have students that are starting LinkedIn profiles. So the ability to just kind of say like, here's who I am outside of what I've highlighted for you here. Do you have to have one? No. I could tell you that all of our students are encouraged to have one.
Very good. Monica, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend setting up some kind of a website, even if maybe social media, but also like not all students are very social. I mean, I'm not on social media that much. So that's one good way. And then also just like creating a website through Wix. Wix is a really easy thing to use. You can throw a bunch of stuff on there. Here's some art pieces I made. Here's some stories that I wrote. Here's a little bit more about me. It's kind of a clever way to get in a virtual, because think of it this way, right? But beyond your grades and test scores, how are schools going to know about you, right? So it's a way to kind of show your personality and your creative side and other things about you. So it's kind of like a virtual interview. So putting together some kind of a quick website where you can highlight different parts of yourself is really useful.
At the same time, I would think with the double-edged sword with social media, keep it positive, right? Keep it.
Yeah.
Gotta
Be careful.
watch what you put out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
You never know.
As we wrap up, a couple more questions, and thank you all for those watching for your questions. Much appreciated. To separate yourself, perhaps distinguish yourself, I should say, with a college application. Are there any say for low-income students or those that might come from a select background? Are there checks on an application, perhaps a first college student in the family? Do these things, from a protected group, I want to say in the sort of the right way here, can that help a college application?
Yeah, colleges are just like you have goals for college. Colleges have their own goals, which is also a lot of the times the reason why my child is perfect. Why weren't they admitted? Because the college has their own goals that they're getting from their board and their president as well. Being a first generation college student is a demographic that is asked of all colleges. Is asked of all college students. What's your background is asked by all different college students, and colleges are looking to diversify. They are trying to see what they can bring to their campus as well. Is it an advantage? Sometimes. Is it a disadvantage? Sometimes. But again, you are who you are. You can't can't change who you are when you're finally at 17 to say, oh, that's not my background anymore. So I think that, it's definitely a piece of it. Is it a make or break piece of it? Depends on the school and depends on what their goal is. Just to give an example, Brown came out and made a statement, I think like last year around this time, that said, our goal is to be 50% diverse. And every time each of these different schools put out their statistics, the first thing they talk about are, this is the makeup of our class. Diversity could be anything from, we finally got that one student from South Dakota, to, you're a first generation college student. So it's a piece of it, and just like the world.
Yes, and a couple more questions. Parents and the residents are asking some great questions here. Volunteering, we hadn't talked about that, community service specifically, but is that something good for the students to be involved with? It seems like we know the answer to that question, and good to put on your resume. Again, getting back to the point Monica was making about go with your passion, which is so important. But Melanie, you're shaking your head as well. I mean, Nick, makes sense. Volunteer activities.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you want to do, we say like the top 5 in the activities list, the top 5 activities that you're presenting. So you want to do a little bit of everything, right? You want to do community service, sports, and it doesn't have to be that those 5 things are the same for every student. Like, what are your 5 things? But throwing in there a little bit of volunteering, but also, trying to, when you're doing volunteering, you have to be careful with that, because volunteering, there's a large range of how involved you can get. So you really want to pick something. So for example, Key Club is a very popular club. I would say like 70% of the students I work with are in Key Club, but what they do in Key Club is so different. Some are really involved and some are just showing up at events. So if you're pick a volunteer activity that you would be happy to do, that you feel like you'll do for a long period of time and that you enjoy, and that so again, going back to the quality of what you're doing. So it's really important that you're doing volunteering around stuff that you feel like you can commit to for a long period of time.
Good point. So the last question, it has to do with entrance exams and scores. So one of the parents has asked, do colleges know about these test scores for the PSAT?
No.
And they don't know about the PSAT.
Nope.
And if you could just reiterate, you mentioned super scoring, and I just want those watching to understand exactly what that is. So explain if they take more than one. Yeah.
Right. So this is a school by school policy. Many schools will do this. You have to check with each individual admissions department to see, and there's lists online, of course, that you can find of schools that will do this. But essentially what it is you send them all of your test scores or multiple test scores from various SATs that you've taken or various ACTs, although the ACT now reports your super score for you. But anyway, what it is the college will then cherry pick your best individual section scores from across, a couple of different tests. So the SAT scores consist of verbal score and a math score. So if you do really well on math the first time you take the SAT, but not so great on verbal, and you take the SAT again in a couple of months and you do great on verbal, or at least better on verbal than you did the past time, but not quite as good on math, you can send to college both of those scores, and they'll take your math score from the first time, the better math score, and the verbal score from the second time, the better verbal score, add those together, and that's your score, for that you've submitted for admissions purposes. According to, University of Michigan, that is your SAT score.
Understood. So thank you all, the 3 of you, for your time, for your knowledge. You all are a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate it. Livingston Education appreciates it. Our community appreciates it. Let's wrap up by sharing how how people could contact you. So again, Melanie from Admit You Consulting.
Sure. So again, you can reach us online. We are www.admituconsulting.com, and that's the letter U in the middle. You can reach us via email at info@admituconsulting.com. We also have a phone in this kind of world today, and it's 973-731-1947. You could also find us on social media. And when we were talking about the essays, so happens our post today was all about all the different types of essays that you can do. And on social media, our Facebook is Admit You Consulting. And on Instagram, we are at Admit You Consult. And I'm happy to answer any questions and, really appreciate being a part of this community. Monica and I both learned that we both grew up here. So many of us leave Livingston and come back. And I'm really happy to have worked at the high school and then established my business here in Livingston. So everyone have a
Graduated
good
from
night.
LHS, right?
Yeah,
I learned that you both graduated from LHS.
that's right. So,
Yeah.
so I wish everybody a great night and thank you for being here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Nick, how could people be in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. So we are firstchoiceprep.com. We're on Instagram and Facebook as First Choice Prep. You can email us at excel@firstchoiceprep.com, but really the best way to get in touch with us is go to our website, firstchoiceprep.com, and then fill out the contact thing there. But again, I really do appreciate, the time and letting us speak in the forum here. It was really great. And thanks very much.
Thank you. Monica, how can people be in touch with you?
Yeah, so definitely the website is the best way, C2 Education Livingston. And I also want to mention that this poster behind me is an academic timeline. Not very strict, but just has very thorough in terms of everything you could think about. And I shared that with Mike. So if anybody wants that, there's a virtual copy available for that. And then also on our website, not only can you get in touch with us in terms of how to connect with the center in Livingston, we do have a physical location. You can stop in if you want to. People do that. We do pop-ins. But also we have a lot of webinars on our website. There's a section where we get into more details about how do you make your college list, how to think about different building, like how to think about the tests and everything. So there's like a wealth of resources that we have on our website. If anybody just has hours and hours to spend on this and wants to take some notes. So again, thank you so much, Mike, for arranging this. Happy to be a part of it. Great to meet some other fellow people in the field. Looking forward to, just hearing from anyone that has more questions or wants to be in touch.
And again, thank you all very much. So we're going to wrap up by now. How we give the wave. Have a great evening. Great day, everyone. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Good night.
Bye.